The forgotten town of Black Hollow. The camera pans through a foggy, dense forest, trees towering above like skeletal giants. The sound of wind howling through the branches is deafening, the sky covered in thick, swirling clouds. The camera zooms in on an old, worn sign that reads, "Welcome to Black Hollow." A thick mist clings to the ground like a blanket, and the eerie quiet is punctuated only by the occasional snap of a twig. This is not a place where people should be, yet one man, Mark, finds himself drawn to it. Mark had always been fascinated by the unknown. Urban legends, ghost stories, abandoned places. He sought them out like a moth to a flame. The stories surrounding Black Hollow were particularly intriguing. It was said to be a ghost town lost to time, swallowed by the forest, its inhabitants mysteriously vanishing without a trace. Some claimed it was the site of a terrible disease outbreak. Others whispered about a more sinister reason, but the most chilling part was always the same. Anyone who went to Black Hollow never came back. One evening, while Mark was sitting at a bar, an old man with a face so wrinkled and sunken that it seemed like the years had slowly devoured him approached. His clothes were tattered, his hands shaking slightly as he held a half-drunk glass of whiskey. "You don't know what you're asking for," the man said, his voice hoarse. He leaned closer, eyes dark and fearful. "Black Hollow ain't just a ghost town. It's a place that steals your soul." Mark chuckled. "I've heard the stories, but I'm not one for ghost tales. Just a little curiosity." The man's eyes darkened further. "It's not curiosity you should worry about. Once you hear it, you won't be able to leave." Mark shrugged it off as nonsense, a drunken rambling from an old man. But the warning clung to his mind as he set out the next morning, a spark of curiosity igniting in his chest. Mark's journey began like any other. His old jeep rattled along the bumpy, winding roads as he ventured deeper into the forest. The further he went, the more the world seemed to fade into a strange, unsettling quiet. The air grew colder, the trees denser, the sunlight thinner. It was as though the very earth was pulling him away from civilization and into something ancient, something forgotten. The road turned into a narrow, almost hidden path, barely wide enough for his car. Mark pressed on, eager to reach his destination. The trees towered above him like sentinels, their branches twisted into gnarled shapes. The fog was thick now, swallowing the world whole, until only the path ahead remained visible. As the day drew to a close, the mist grew even thicker. It curled around Mark's car like fingers, pulling at the edges of his vision. The only sound was the faint hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the tires on the dirt path. After hours of driving, Mark's car suddenly sputtered and died. He was stranded. "Perfect," Mark muttered, rolling his eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. He couldn't even hear the birds, the wind, or any animals moving in the distance. It was as though all life had vanished. Then, through the fog, he saw it. A rusted iron gate. Covered in vines, the entrance to Black Hollow stood before him, half hidden by the mist. With no other option, Mark grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car, the cold biting at his skin. He pushed open the gate, the sound of metal groaning in protest. The fog swallowed him whole as he stepped onto the path leading into the town. Black Hollow was not what Mark had expected. It wasn't just abandoned. It was forgotten. Time had turned the town into a graveyard of crumbling buildings, cracked streets, and rotting wood. The houses were decaying from the inside out, their windows shattered and doors left ajar as if the people had left in a hurry, leaving their lives behind in a half-finished state. Mark wandered through the town, his footsteps echoing through the empty streets. He stopped in front of a building, a small house, the door slightly open. The air was thick with dust and decay. He stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. It was a small living room with old, rotting furniture. But there was something else. Scrawled on the walls, in faded red paint, were strange symbols. Runes, sigils, and words that made no sense to him. He snapped a few photos, thinking it was just the work of local vandals, but then something strange happened. The silence seemed to close in around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Suddenly, a soft whisper, faint like a breeze, brushed his ear. "Leave now." Mark spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper grew louder, and he felt his heart pounding in his chest. It was as if the town itself was trying to communicate with him, warning him, urging him to turn back. He backed out of the house, his eyes scanning the street, but the town was still, eerily still. Mark felt a sad, the lost city of Avalora. I couldn't believe my eyes as I held the journal in my hands. It was my grandfather's, weathered and faded, yet so full of life. I'd always known him as an explorer, a man driven by mysteries. But what I found within the pages of this book was far more than just his notes. It was a map that had been carefully hidden for years, and it pointed to a place my grandfather had always dreamed of, but never found. Avalora. My heart raced. The lost city of Avalora. I had to admit, I had always wondered about it. My grandfather had spoken of it like a mythical place, a city older than time, filled with treasures beyond imagination. And it wasn't just about the gold or the jewels. It was the knowledge it held, secrets that could change everything. But then he had disappeared. One day he was there, full of stories and ideas, and the next he was gone, lost in pursuit of Avalora. No one knew what happened, and the mystery of it haunted me for years. Now I was holding his final clue. Could this map be the key to uncovering the city, or was it just another dead end? I didn't waste a second. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Max, an old friend and the best tech expert I knew, would help me decode the map. Samira, a local historian, would be our guide. She had always been fascinated by the ancient cultures of the region, and I figured she'd know how to navigate the myths and the truths. Max and Samira were skeptical at first. I could see it in their eyes when I pulled out the map. This had all the markings of a fool's errand. But I was determined. I had to do this for Grandpa. Max took one look at the map and raised an eyebrow. "You're really going after this, huh?" I nodded, my voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "We are. Grandpa was right about this. I know it." We set out 2 days later. The jungle was thick and heavy, with the scent of damp earth, and the air was hot and suffocating. Max and Samira argued about directions for hours, but the map was clear. It wasn't going to be easy. The deeper we traveled, the more I felt like we were being watched. Something was off. The air felt heavy, like the jungle itself was holding its breath. And then we found it. A hidden temple, covered in vines and obscured by the dense trees. The map had led us here, and I felt a mix of awe and unease as I stepped toward it. I never expected the challenges that awaited us. First, there were the puzzles. Ancient symbols etched into stone, cryptic messages that required all of us to think outside the box. Max was incredible with his tech, using his gadgets to decipher the code. Samira, with her knowledge of ancient languages, was the one who unlocked the meaning behind the symbols. But the deeper we went, the darker it became. Traps, hidden in plain sight, they were designed to protect something important. The whole city felt like it was alive, as though the ruins themselves were warning us. It wasn't just the ancient puzzles we had to worry about, though. There was someone else after the city's secrets. Drake. I knew the moment I saw him, he wasn't just some treasure hunter. He was ruthless, willing to do anything to claim Avalora for himself. I felt the weight of his eyes on us, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I had to act fast. That moment came sooner than I expected. We barely had time to set up camp before Drake and his crew arrived. The confrontation was inevitable. "Step aside, Lily," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "The city belongs to those who can claim it. You don't understand what you're dealing with." I clenched my fists. His words stung, but I couldn't let him take what wasn't his. Not after everything my grandfather had sacrificed, not after everything I'd come here for. Max and Samira moved quickly, distracting Drake's team while I made a run for it. My heart pounded as I navigated through the thick underbrush, but there was no turning back now. I had to get to the Temple of Light before Drake did. We finally found it. The Temple of Light. It was everything my grandfather had described. Breathtaking and ancient, filled with grandeur, but strangely serene. The glow from the stone in the center of the temple was unlike anything I had ever seen. But as I stood there, my heart heavy with the weight of the discovery, Samira pulled me aside. "Lily," she whispered, There's something you need to understand. The treasure, it's not what we think. There's a curse. Avalora's secrets are meant to stay buried,